Today, I'm going to be having a special Mother's Day sermon, and I picked this up from Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. So the title of my message this morning is Honor Your Mother. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at what the Bible has to say about this. In Exodus, it talks about honoring your father and your mother. In Exodus chapter 20, in the 10 Commandments, Moses went up onto the mountain, Mount Sinai, and God used his finger to write in tablets of stone the 10 Commandments. These were God's commands to the children of Israel. And it says, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long on the land which Yahweh your God is giving you. This was the first command to honor your parents. And then in the New Testament, we see it paraphrased. But right now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to study the Hebrew word for honor. This idea of honoring your parents is how God commands us to honor our parents, with the implication that they are his delegated representatives with his authority and responsibility over the children. So God is the one who set up parents to have the authority over their children. In the Strong's Concordance, this word honor has a very specific meaning, and we're going to go into that a little more in depth. It's this idea of to prize something, to prize, to honor, to fix a value upon, to revere, to honor, to value. This idea of valuing your mom, honoring her. In Ephesians chapter 6, it says, honor your parents. But in American society today, we often ask ourselves, do we see kids honoring their parents? Many children are rebelling, they insult their parents, they show no honor to their parents, and it's become more and more commonplace. When I was growing up, it was very important to show honor to your parents. That was the societal expectations. But as the years have gone on, it's been more accepted in society that kids rebel. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, it says, in the last days, many will rebel against their parents, and they will feel no love towards their parents. And so, this idea of honoring is a command of God. It is a command to honor your parents. God is the one who put them, he is the one who has the greater authority. He put them in authority. In media today, it's really commonplace to see kids rebelling as young as elementary school against their parents and not showing them respect. This is heartbreaking to me. And truly, these people are breaking God's command to honor their parents. They're disregarding that. So I encourage us today to recall how critical it is to honor our parents, to cherish them, to revere them. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1, it reiterizes this point, and it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It is right to obey your parents. Powerful words to us today. The idea of obey means to listen, to heed. to obey one's parents. And then I also added Colossians chapter 3, verse 20. This verse says, "Children, obey your parents in everything." It's not limited, like what you want to please them in. Obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. So the Word of God is giving us this command for over 2,000 years, and God's Word never changes. This command of God to honor your parents, and it's reiterated in the New Testament, this pleases God. This is something we are to do that pleases Him. So I want to encourage everyone here to obey God's command. And many parents never teach their children about the 10 Commandments. They're just like, oh, whatever. And their kids are in rebellion. And then it's too late, and they're showing them this command, but it's too late. So it's important that as our children are young, that we teach them the 10 Commandments, that we reiterate these things. These are more precious than gold. These commands, when they come into our minds and into our hearts, there's something that is preserved, and as we grow up, oftentimes you might think about rebelling, but then you think about the command and you realize, oh, I need to obey parents. I need to obey my parents. Sometimes our parents do the wrong thing. As parents, we make mistakes. We are not perfect, but still, as children, are still required to honor their parents. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 2 goes on to say, "Honor your father and mother, which is the first command with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on the earth." God will bless you when you have a good relationship with your parents. Many, many years as a pastor, I've seen children grow up and their parents pass away, and oftentimes the children have a lot of regrets when their parents pass away, and they say, wow, in the past I should have honored my parents more. I wish I'd had a better relationship with them. And they feel so heartbroken at their parents passing, but it's too late. The time has already been lost. Their parents are dead and buried. And now they have a lot of bitterness and disappointments, and I've counseled a lot of people who are like, oh, my parents, I wish I could ask them to forgive me. I wish that I could just have that opportunity to honor them. So the question to you is, if your parents are still alive, hey, jump at the chance now to have that relationship, to honor them, to have a good relationship with them. Right now, my parents have passed away. I don't have any regrets. I had a great relationship with my parents. I love my parents. I don't feel regret. And so I hope that when your parents pass away, you could have a good relationship with them, and so you would have that same feeling of peace that I do. So today's this command goes on honoring This is not an option from God, like I can rebel against my parents or I can obey them. This is a command. This is a requirement for all people, for all children to honor their parents. Not something optional. So this morning's message is going to focus a little bit more in depth and on this topic. And this morning we're going to focus on honoring your mother. Honor her. And then we can see other examples throughout God's word of other mothers who we honor. So the first mother, the mother of all living, is Eve. So Eve, it means mother of all living. She is the one who started to give life to the human race. She is the first example. There were no other women prior to Eve. She is the first one that God created. And all of us are descendants of Eve today. So I Google searched how many people are in the world today. There are 7.6 billion people on the earth in 2018 at the most recent count. And they all came from Eve. We are all her descendants. All 7.6 billion people are descendants of Eve, the mother of all living. She is the first one that gave the gift of life. And now, wow, it impacts the entire world, but it goes back to Eve. Yes, she fell into sin. So I'm not going to talk about evolution and the idea of monkeys evolving into man. That's not what I believe in. I believe that God made man out of the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and that he was perfect and that he wasn't somehow related to a descendant of apes or anything like that. But I believe also that God had him fall asleep, and then that God pulled out of Adam's rib and made a woman from Adam, and made man and woman. They became one flesh, and they had children, and their descendants are the parents of all 7.6 billion people on this earth. But Eve is the one who started it all. And then we have the flood of Noah, where God saved 8 souls again, and then they had all these children and many, many descendants on the earth. But it all started with Eve. Wow. The mother of all living. And we see these in Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. And we're thankful for that. Also, perhaps you've heard the story of Sarah. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. And Sarah said, as she was an old woman, she gave birth to him. She said, she named him Isaac because God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this with me will laugh with me. So the name Isaac that she named her son, it means laughter. Sarah was filled with joy when she gave birth to Isaac. I have met some people who have the gift of laughter. They're laughing, they have such joy. There are different people, and typically they have a name sign that is like on their chin or near the sign for laughter, because they are always laughing. There's a few of you that have been given name signs kind of similar to that. And Isaac His name literally means laughter. He is the one that brought joy and laughter to his family. My wife has a cousin who I've met and interacted with, and this cousin is always laughing. Gwen. Yeah, Gwen is always laughing. She's laughing about something. I love people who laugh versus people who are always sad and downcast and bitter. You know, you can feel really sad when you're around a person like that, but when you're around a person who laughs and enjoys life, you can feel good. You know, a person who's friendly. I'm sure that if you went back in a time machine and interacted with Sarah and Abraham and you saw the joy that came to them when they had Isaac, you would have noticed their laughter and all the joy that was in their lives. So Sarah is this example of one who gives delight. So children should look up to their mothers as the one who gives delight, who laughs with them. You know, not a mother who's constantly grouchy and angry at their children. So consider, which are you? Are you the kind of mom who's always angry at your kids, always losing your temper with your kids, and they see that constantly their entire life? And they're like, oh, my mom's always mad. She's always grouchy. She's always moody. And sometimes there are mothers who have a good attitude. They are filled with joy, filled with laughter. I remember that my mom was always filled with joy, especially going to church. I still see her in my mind's eye laughing when I remember her. When I look at pictures of her, she always has a smile on her face. She always had that wonderful joy and excitement in her life. And when Sarah gave birth to Isaac, her first son, she was an old woman. She gave birth to him and she was filled with joy and she was showing him off and bragging about it, just filled with joy. She was filled with joy. Jacque Abed, the example, this woman is the mother of Moses, Jacque Abed. During the time the pharaohs ruled and they were killing all of the firstborn, all the boys, and they were having them thrown into the river. There were strict commands, and they didn't want any more sons born in Israel, but the Israelites rebelled and they kept their children. They hid them. And it talks about how Jacque Abed saw Moses, that he was a beautiful child. He was very, very good looking. And so they kept him and they tried to preserve him. For 3 months, they hid him in secret. And she was trying to take care of it. Can you imagine? You know, the baby's hungry. You have to feed it. She, tried to keep the baby quiet for 3 months because the soldiers were looking. If they would hear a baby crying, they would kill it. So Jacque Abed, she must have felt after 3 months, wow, I can't keep him, I can't take care of him, but she loved him so much, she wanted to protect him. So, in this struggle that she had a daughter, Miriam, and she placed the child in the basket and put it in the reeds along the bank of the Nile. The point, though, about Jacque Abed that I want to make this morning, that she was a protector. How many people today protect children? Instead, we see women committing abortion often in our society. We see children not being protected. Instead, we see them being killed. Millions and millions and millions of children each and every day in America. And our society says, that's fine, it doesn't matter, but this is tragic. In Psalm 109, it says, God, you knit me together in my mother's womb. You fashioned my inward parts. God is the one who puts us together in our mother's womb. wants women to protect their offspring because they are his children. And Christians should be protecting. And and there's also movements in America that are like, oh, women should have a right to an abortion, and we see that. It breaks my heart, and people think, oh, it's fine, it just goes on each and every day, just throw it in the trash. It's like people feel like it's insignificant, like it's not a life. These unborn children, it breaks my heart. But we see the example of Jacque Abed, this wonderful example of a woman in a society that devalued life of children, and how she rebelled against that, and she protected her child. She protected her son. She kept him safe, and she prayed and asked God to provide for him. The command of the king was that the child should be drowned and thrown into the river and drowned. But his mother protected Moses and took care of him. And then look what God did. God used Moses to deliver the nation of Israel. How would there have been a leader if Moses had been killed? But God used Moses. And so we also, like Jacque Abed, need to be protectors of life. So we see that Jacque Abed put her child in the basket and sent him off. And then Pharaoh's daughter, it was going along the river, the little basket was floating along the river, and what the baby must have been thinking. I mean, when you read about that and you see that, but his sister followed him because she was watching him. She was watching the basket, she was going through the reeds and wanted to make sure and to see what would happen. And how the little basket was led to the Pharaoh's daughter. And we see that because she was out bathing. She was out taking her bath in the river, and she heard a cry. And then she had her servants bring her this basket, and she looked in it. And when she saw the child, her heart was touched. And she fell in love with this child. And she thought, oh, my, she just loved him so much. Now her father, she was the Egyptian king's daughter. I mean, he had been ordering all of these male Israelite children to be murdered. But she saw him and she didn't want to, because she had a heart of mercy and compassion, and she took care of him. So she accepted it. She could have tossed him back out into the river. She could have let him go. She could have thrown him in the water, out of the basket, and let him drown. But when she heard that sound, she looked around and she thought, who put this child here? And we know the story, right? We know how people nowadays, will put babies in the trash, and other people will hear them and will find them. I mean, imagine putting a child in the trash and more trash is put upon them, and you see these stories like this in the news all the time, and then somebody finds them and says, I take this child. I accept this child. This is a child. Who would do this? But they knew this child was Jewish. They knew it. But still, she could have looked at him and said, oh, Jewish child, huh? Well, could grow up to be a thief, it could be anything. I'm just going to let him go. He's not perfect, let him go. But no, she accepted this child as her own. She took him as her own. Didn't matter the color of his skin, didn't matter how different he was from her. Because they were different from the Egyptians, and they looked different, but still she took this child. So we see that she is looked upon as one who accepted life, the acceptor of life. Just like when parents see their babies, it doesn't matter what they look like, and they change through the months. When they get to be 6 months old, 8 months, and then they get to grow up, and then around 1 or 2 or 4, and then, they're walking around, you can hear them, or you make a sound, and they don't hear anything. And some parents become very concerned because they're making noises and their child is not responding. And they're calling to the child, and they pick up the child, and they carry them off to the doctor, and the doctor does the test themselves, and then they look at this, and they examine the child, and they do all these different tests, and then the doctor comes in all sad and miserable and says, your child is deaf. And the hearing parents, they weep and they cry and everything is so terrible. And it's like they don't want this child anymore because this child is deaf. They want their perfect hearing child. They want it to be just like them so that they can converse, but their child is deaf. And nowadays they say, what do we do? What do you do? And the doctor says, well, we can do a cochlear implant and put that. And then the child will have to have, therapy, speech therapy and everything. But signing is just put aside. It's not mentioned. They don't say that. So they go to their computers and they force the child to learn speech therapy, and he grows up with his cochlear implant, hearing and trying to learn to talk like the hearing one. And then one day another deaf child will come and he's signing away, and this deaf child will look and go to meet this one and will try to gesture with him, and then his parents will say, no, stop that, get away from my child. I don't want you hanging around with my child. And I saw that so many times where they would keep their child away. They didn't want them mixing with the deaf community. They wanted them not to enter into the deaf culture and the deaf world, but they wanted them to become like them. It's as if they wanted to control their mouths and their ears and their everything, so that they would go out moving their mouths and be all oral when they spoke with people, be like hearing people, talking like them. But they became so frustrated at that time that they just couldn't get it. But there, once they met someone who could sign, it was so fast, and communication was just so great. And just to learn that and to go on through life learning all of this, picking it up and being able to talk. I've seen so many stories like this. But then there are those parents that look at their child and say, I get it. Or they're blind. Or they have some other problem, but they accept them. And they accept the challenge that it will be to teach this child instead of tossing this child away. So like the Pharaoh's daughter, even though she knew he was an Israelite child, she took care of him until he grew up. She accepted him. She went against the rules of the time. And then we see this woman, Hannah. We remember Hannah. It says, in bitterness of soul, Hannah prayed. She could not have children. She had struggled and could never bear children. And she had cried out to the Lord and said, I cannot bear children. Lord, help me. Give me something. And one day, she became pregnant. And her child was born, and it was Samuel. The important thing here, the significant thing here, is that we see that in faith, she prayed to God. She turned to God. Now, some of us, there are people who can't have children nowadays. And there are other people who throw their children away. And then there are people who adopt children. And it's like, where is God's love for me? In the old days with the orphanages, and you'd see when people would go to pick their children, there would be children saying, wait for me, and they, it's almost like going to the SPCA when you're going to pick a puppy or something. You pick a black one, you pick a brown one, and all the puppies are like jumping up like, beep, 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 beep. You're thinking, oh my gosh, there's so many, which one do I get? And then you see the one that makes eye contact with you. You want the perfect pet to bring back to your family. It's tough. I never go there anymore. I can't go there. It just breaks my heart. Because it's like I want to take them all, just to love one. Just to adopt one. But, I did go that a long time ago, and I saw one. And there were all these bunches of puppies. They were all jumping around. And then one in the way, way back, with long ears, just sitting back there. And I said, I'm going to take that one. I want that one. And I had him for a good long time. My other dog had died, but there were all these other dogs acting up in front of me. But then there was this little shy one in the back, and I picked him. But some people, when they hear that they can't have children, then they adopt, because there are so many children in the world that need parents, and it's expensive. It is. But we see back in those times, we see that the Pharaoh's daughter accepted Moses. She just took him.
And God has given us a command to pray. And there are people who want to take children and take care of them. And there are other people that, think, no, they don't want to. And then some people, they adopt their child, they take care of it. And then all of a sudden the mom gets pregnant and births her own child, has her own child. It's amazing. And then has 2 or 3. And then she'll look at the adopted child and say, well, no, I have my own biological children now. And they put them aside. And that is so sad. That is so sad. But, my mother had such an influence on my life when I was growing up. And every day I saw my mother pray. Sometimes I'd say, where's Mom? What's she doing? And I'd go open a door and my mom would be on her knees and she would be praying to God. And I would see that and I would quietly close the door and leave her alone. But my mom was always praying. And I saw that. Always saw that. And it was amazing. Amazing to me. She was a prayer girl. And then, of course, we know Mary. She was innocent. She was young. Until the angel came and told her that she would bear a child. Now, Mary had never been with a man. She had never had relations with a man. And then suddenly she was pregnant. Can you imagine that? But she believed. And a lot of people, Joseph was concerned. Joseph didn't believe, and he wanted to blame her for what she had done. He thought she had cheated on him. But look at this verse here. It says, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child that you will bear. But why? It says, blessed is she who has believed that what the Lord has said to her, that she would bear a child, would be true. And she held fast to that truth. She never had any doubt. And as she watched her body grow, and as she saw that, she still held steadfast to the Lord until she birthed her child. And her child was called Jesus. And he was the great Savior of the world that all of us turn to right now when we believe and we trust in him. I mean, an amazing example of a woman who believed. So she was a believer of the Lord. And then this last story that I want to tell you, these 2 women that Paul writes about, Lois and Eunice. Do we have Eunice over there? But anyway, these 2 women in particular, they, when Timothy was young, one was his mother and one was his grandmother. And they both were shining examples to him because he saw their lives and he looked at their lives and he took it all in and he remembered all of it. It says, I have been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice. And I now am persuaded now lives in you also. Because he was saying, your mother and your grandmother have shown you, they have taught you, they have explained to you. And he took it all in. And that was the significance of these 2 women's lives, that they believed. But they were great models for him, great role models for Timothy. And children will watch, children will see, and they will copy what their mother does. When I was looking in the reading and I was studying about that, it says that most children will look to their mother for love and tender mercy, patience, comfort, more than their fathers, because usually the dads are out working, and when they kind of come and go, but within their lives, all of their lives, the bulk of their knowledge that children get is from their mothers. Their mothers are their exemplary models throughout life. And another thing that is so important that we see is to honor her like Eve. Eve was the giver of life. Such a wonderful gift. Eve did not complain about her life. She just took it on. Some moms, whether their children are deaf or hearing or whatever disabilities they have, they thank God for the gift of life. And then we know that Sarah who laughed, she delighted in life. She was the delighter of one's life. Jacque Abed, she was the protector of life, for she cherished Moses and protected him. Jacque Abed was Moses' mother. And then Pharaoh's daughter, she accepted him. There was never any confusion in her life when she saw that lady, when she saw that baby. You know, it's like when you take your child to deaf school, take your child to school and he's deaf, and you think people are going to look at you. Or maybe they go to parties or whatever, and you think they're going to look at your child because he's deaf. And you think that, maybe some people don't want even people to know that their child is deaf, and they prefer people to think that they have no children. No children at all. But Pharaoh's daughter accepted her Israelite boy. And Hannah, she prayed to God for life. Mary believed in the Lord. And Lois and Eunice, they were models. They were models of a righteous life. And we see all of these women are so important. But there's a big and we look in the Old Testament, and we see, this is a picture of my mom. That's my mom. You see, my mom was always laughing. She was always happy. Such a woman. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 2, it says, "Your lives are a letter written in our hearts." My mom took everything into her heart. My mother was inscribed in my life. She's in my heart. Who I am now is because of my mom, that woman there. My mother was hearing. Her sighting skills were not all that good. She would do a lot of finger spelling and everything. But she was strong in faith. And she would show life. And she showed how to live life. And that has been inscribed in my heart. And this is a picture of my wife, Ruby. She's in the back. Hi, Hon. Hi, Hon. In Proverbs chapter 31, verse 28, wise woman. My wife is a wise woman. She's really great. And she's a blessing. She's a blessing to us. We have many children, we have many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But she's such a blessing to us. And we have been married for 40 years. So, oh my gosh, thinking of all the things that we've gone through in all those 40 years. But still, her life shows praise to God, my wife. I'm very, very proud of her. She tends to not like that sort of acclamation, but our children are for helping raise our children and the grandchildren and everything. She praises the Lord, and she just has all of that within her heart, blessings in her heart.
So the conclusion of my message this morning focuses on an encouragement for you to thank your mothers. Thank your mother. If your mother is still alive, be sure and thank her. Thank her for giving you life. Do you thank your mother? You should. Thank her for giving you life. Additionally, in being a delight to your life. And thank your mother for protecting your life. Your mother didn't abandon you. Instead, she cherished you. She protected you. She raised you. For accepting your life. Maybe your mother accepted you as a deaf person, and be thankful for that. For praying for your life. prayer is amazing, and my mother's prayers had an amazing impact on my life. And thankful to our moms for believing in Jesus Christ. And my mom just had this amazing example of loving Jesus Christ and following Jesus Christ, and I can follow in that example that she left for me. I'm so thankful, and thank your mother for exemplifying life for you, being that example. Like, for example, I remember my mom teaching me not to steal, not to lie. Very, very thankful for those lessons that my mother taught me. And so if your mother's still alive, I hope that you get an opportunity to thank her today. Once again, I want to reiterate the key verse this morning. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy a long life on the earth. Ephesians 6, verses 2 through 3. So this morning, of course, I want to emphasize honoring your mother and this idea. It will go well with you. You will be blessed of God if you do this. It will happen. God will bless you for honoring your mother. And it's this idea of you will enjoy long life on the earth. Wow, here I am in my 60s. I have had an enjoyable life. And I believe definitely that one of the reasons for this is because I honored my parents. And I hope that you also will follow this, one of God's 10 commandments, to honor your parents so that you will be blessed indeed. It's a very simple answer. God will bless you. He will give you peace in your life. You won't be disappointed with your life. You will have a joyous life. Let's stand together for our closing.